We've got a couple of folks on the call from the initiative that can do some color commentary, answer some questions. If you have either technical or policy questions, we'll be able to manage that for you. So welcome to the introduction to the OCI, the Open Credentialing Initiative. And let's see, here we go. Talk a little bit about just the introduction as far as what OCI is and the challenge that is faced in the Drug Supply Chain Security Act in certain areas that need identity and the identification of authorized trading partner, and a little bit of a roadmap. I'm Bob Celeste, and I'm with the Center for Supply Chain Studies, and we're hosting the incubator for OCI. And let's see if we have other folks from OCI on. I see David Kessler on, Chris, Saneem. So we'll be able to answer any questions you have as we go through. So a little bit of introduction. So OCI is an open ecosystem. Everything that OCI creates, all of our deliverables, all of our documentation, specifications, performance criteria, all of that is open for all to use. And you don't necessarily have to be a member of OCI to use it, but membership is helpful in driving the initiative forward and the future of the use of these kind of credentials. Some of the advantages of the OCI architecture in using credentials is the efficiency, the due diligence, certainly behind issuing those credentials. We're very serious about the conformance criteria or the due diligence that is needed in order to establish an identity and then establish and maintain whether a company has authorized trading partner status. The OCI has been working with a number of entities in creating these specifications, and I guess you would say standards for the use, application standards at least, for using W3C standard verifiable credentials. We've been working with the Healthcare Distribution Association for a while now in piloting and also working with their members in starting to test the use of authorized trading partner credentials for product information verifications for DSCSA. Working also with the GS1 standards body to ensure that attributes within the OCI credentials are standard, and also how it can be used within the GS1 specifications. The partnership for DSCSA governance, we've been working with those folks also to be able to ensure that the OCI use of verifiable credentials is recognized within the industry and other partners also. We've also been working with, made a number of presentations and working with the FDA also on what credentialing means and what it could mean also for regulator access to DSCSA and to DSCSA trading partners. So as I said before, this OCI is an open initiative, and we've been working through not only the specification of the credentials themselves, the schemas, if you will, the definitions, the meaning of the credentials, and also the conformance criteria at a number of different levels. So OCI has published conformance criteria for credential issuers. So if there is an entity that would like to be a credential issuer, if they would go through that conformance criteria, and we're developing a conformance program to ensure that everyone that is claiming that they can do issuance or VRS use of credentials or wallet capability is really able to do that, and is trustworthy in their execution of what they need to provide to the community. We've been using open standards and a number of different standards, and some people may ask, why isn't this a GS1 effort or a W3C effort? We're actually using a number of standards, and so that's why OCI is using or applying these standards from GS1, from W3C, from DIF. We've been working with stakeholders throughout the supply chain, manufacturers, wholesalers, and dispensers in order to define the specs for these credentials and also the use of these credentials. There's a lot of resources both on the OCI website and the OCI GitHub. If you're a business-oriented person, you may want to look at the website, get some information there. If you are a technical person, the GitHub certainly has quite a bit of information about the specifications and conformance criteria. So how OCI is organized? Right now, we initiated OCI through the needs that you'll see in a moment around the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, and so that has its own program running right now. You see the ATP credentialing for DSCSA. There is a steering committee that directs the activities within that group. There are a number of industry advisors that we have working with us, and then we have a technical work group that's been developing a lot of the specifications and credentials parts of the program. If you see on the right, there are a number of areas that are being introduced to OCI, and they will probably most likely form their own programs underneath the OCI. So you see pharmaceutical medical device recalls, customer supplier onboarding and dynamic information access. These are areas where there's been some research in how to use these credentials also for other activities, and you'll probably see those programs starting up also. And in the middle, we do have our messaging and communication work group that you can be part of to develop further, communicate the use of these standards. Here's a list of some of the folks that are actually starting to use the credentials and have implemented various parts of the credentials. You see credential issuers, wallet providers, integrators, and other supporters, both HDA and GS1 we've been working with. The trading partners, that's probably a smaller list, probably an older, smaller list, but there's a number of additional trading partners that are starting to use OCI-based verifiable credentials for Drug Supply Chain Security Act. So let's talk a little bit about the business part or the regulatory part of this and why this has all come together. If we look at the U.S. Drug Supply Chain Security Act, I don't think when we first looked at the act back when it was created in 2013, that we realized that there was a little bit of an issue here in terms of identifying entities that may be doing ad hoc requests for information or providing information. If you ever seen the cartoon, there's a cartoon out that two dogs in there. One of them is on a computer and he's looking over at the other dog saying, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. That applies here. On the internet, no one knows whether you are a legitimate manufacturer, a legitimate wholesaler, or a legitimate dispenser or pharmacy. And that's really the area that we're technically trying to work at. The Drug Supply Chain Security Act is it's a little bit challenging in that it is a chain of ownership law. In other words, we're not necessarily tracking where the drugs are as they move through the supply chain, but we're tracking ownership. And so there is a bit of a corporate hierarchy that we need to deal with as we move through that. But in essence, it is designed to not only prevent patients from getting bad drugs or counterfeit drugs, but also to detect where those counterfeits may have come through and entered the supply chain. There are 4 key areas that we've been working on with DSCSA, under DSCSA. The first one is The first one actually was a natural one because we first started looking at, in the lower right, serialization of products. So each product within in the US supply chain obviously has a product ID, either a GTIN or an NDC, and a serial number, expiration date, and lot number. So we're able to identify each and every package level product. But also in the law is the edict that requirement that trading partners can only deal with other trading partners if they're authorized, and that authorized is defined in the law as having a license or registration that allows them to perform their role. So if you're a manufacturer, you need to be registered with the FDA. If you're a wholesaler or dispenser, you need to have a state board, a state license for that activity. As we started to look into some of the later parts of the DSCSA, and verification and product tracing are those two. These really are interactions that take place not only between known trading partners, but between anyone in the pharmaceutical supply chain, and it's a bit ad hoc in nature. And so you'll see some of the issues we have here. In our traditional definition of trading partner, if I was to ask anybody what is a trading partner, it's either a customer or a supplier. You've done a certain amount of due diligence that may be taking days or weeks to establish the identity of that trading partner, whether they have the proper licenses before you actually start to provide product or purchase product. And you probably have for DSCSA purposes, a hardened connection between those two trading partners. If you look on the right, it's a little bit more ad hoc in nature. When we're talking about verification of products with the manufacturer, in 2023, anyone in the supply chain can verify a product with a manufacturer for certain reasons. A manufacturer may not have an actual relationship with the entity that's trying to verify a product. They obviously have a relationship with their primary wholesalers, but as you get out to secondary wholesalers, hospitals, and pharmacies, manufacturers may not have a relationship with them. This is also more internet-like network digital connections that are established upon the query. And that same due diligence that you see in the traditional side has to take place in these transactions. And so the architecture or the design around OCI is for trading partners to get their credentials ahead of time. And then we use those credentials in interactions, and manufacturers and anyone in the supply chain, when we're talking about tracing, can be able to establish whether if you're the requester, establish your identity and establish whether you are an authorized trading partner. So this is an example of verification and how it's running within the US right now. There is a verification routing service in the middle that routes messages. But if you look at the two endpoints, the requester could be a wholesaler, a second wholesaler, a dispenser, which could be a pharmacy or a hospital. And they're going to request the manufacturer, which would be the responder, and actually repackagers also, whether the product has been put into commerce. And so the difficulty here is that you have a number of intermediaries that are handling that messaging. And yet at the end of the day, the responder, the manufacturer, needs to be able to establish whether the requester, not necessarily anyone in the middle, but that the requester is who they say they are, that they have ATP status, and that this is them online. Likewise, when the requester receives a message back or a response back, they need to be able to establish that this information has come from a legitimate manufacturer of pharmaceuticals, and that manufacturer does have authorized trading partner status. So all of this is taking place using intermediaries, and so we need a secure, decentralized approach for being able to establish identity and ATP status. So let's just take a look at some of the architecture. So, and that's why we are using these W3C verifiable credentials. It's very decentralized. You don't have to go to a central authority every time you want to verify these credentials, and it maps up well with how the industry is organized around DSCSA, very decentralized in the US. So when we started to look at the need of the industry and establishing both identity and authorized trading partner, we started at the right. We started at how are we going to use these in DSCSA transactions, and specifically for PI verification and tracing. We recognized that we needed, based on the law, that we needed to be able to establish the authorized trading partner status of the trading partner. So you see the middle part there that we worked on. But as we started to work through that, even though this is not part of the law specifically, but in order to establish ATP, you first need to establish the identity of each of the companies. And so working from left to right here, if you were to want to start to use credentials in DSCSA transactions, trading partner would work with a credential issuer, and they would need to provide enough information that the credential issuer was able to do the proper due diligence to identify the company, and then provide that identity credential. There are two major ways that we have so far. There may be more in the future. The first one is for the trading partner to use their DEA signing certificate. And the due diligence that the DEA has established behind that certificate is trustworthy enough for us to then issue an identity credentials for DSCSA purposes. A second way of doing that is to provide corporate documents, and you see a number of them listed here. And there's a certain amount of those, and which ones you would provide in order for the credential issuer to establish your corporate identity. Once that's done, the credential issuer issues you an identity credential, and that's important in the next step. So in the next step, we're going to establish your authorized trading partner status. Within the DSCSA, the way it's written is that you must have a license. So consider a large company that's working in all 50 states. They may have up to 500 licenses, but they really, for ATP status, need to be able to identify that they have at least one legitimate license. And so they also now will go through the same process that we saw before, similar process, where they'll work with a credential issuer, provide them information on their license. The credential issuer will verify that license information. The credential issuer uses the identity credential to be able to establish that this is the entity that has been given the license from a state board of pharmacy, for example. And once that due diligence is satisfied, they issue the ATP verifiable credential. So those two parts are, maybe an annual process for a trading partner. Once that's established, then they're able to use those credentials in transactions. So PI verification and also tracing in proving who they are and that they have ATP status. They also have access to a number of audit information that's being captured by some of the intermediaries, the issuer themselves, the wallet provider, the VRS provider, all have audit information that the trading partner can use if they're ever either audited or investigated. So this is the pilot that was performed early last year. Number of players, and we're, again, as you see, we're using, from an identity point of view, W3C identifiers, decentralized identifiers, and verifiable credentials. As I said before, the way the industry is organized around DSCSA is very decentralized. This technology, both DIDs and verifiable credentials from W3C, aligns well with that decentralization. So this is a more technical dive into how this all works. Essentially, there are two activities that the credential issuer is responsible for. One is doing the due diligence to establish the credential itself, and then periodically checking that credential or what that credential is based on is still legitimate, either the identity credentials that were provided to the issuer or their licensing. And so the credential issuer, in the case where there is an issue, either a license has been revoked by a state board of pharmacy, credential issuer will then revoke the license. And so that's part of the security and trustworthiness of the whole system, that anyone, whether it's a requester or a manufacturer in this diagram, who is receiving a credential can check and make sure that credential is still legitimate. And so you see here where a requester having those credentials now will allow their service provider to use those credentials in requests and responses with other trading partners. Requests in the case of verifying with a manufacturer the product information that's on the label, and at a later point for tracing, where any trading partner who has had the product can request tracing information from another trading partner. So we see the request then moves from the service provider through to the manufacturer service provider, using their digital wallet of the manufacturer is able to verify the identity and the ATP status of the requester. Once that's satisfied, they are able then to respond with the PI verification information, whether it's verifying the product or showing that there's an issue with the product's information. So one last slide as we look forward. As you saw in that organization diagram, there's a number of things that OCI is doing, both with DSCSA and in the future. And actually, we just hit one of our milestones here. That third from the top there, that new GS1 guideline is being published with the capability of using OCI standard verifiable credentials within the PI verification messaging. So we're happy to see that that's been accomplished. There is a testing phase of using VRS, credentials for VRS, and you're able to sign up for that. And I'm just going to bring over just so you can see where this is. So OCI is having a we're organizing a test drive of the OCI solution for industry trading partners, and you can register your interest. Here's our website. As I said before, there's a number of information that's on this, but if you'd like to be part of that test drive in early 2022, you just contact us and we'll have a discussion with you of how that works, and go through a demo of how that will work and how you can test drive the credentials for yourself. Certainly, joining OCI at this stage is helpful in directing the activities that are occurring within OCI. We do have a number of training webinars that can be helpful for you, and then other events that we're planning starting in January. There's a couple of folks that you can contact if you like to get more information. Also, there's a contact form on the website that can start the process for discussions. So I think we're through our